Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Expertise Podcast. I'm your host, Roland Martin, and I hope that today's conversation will expand your knowledge. Today I welcome Joe Ritsma to the show. Joe is a math tutor who owns a Mathnasium franchise. In the following conversation, we talk about what Mathnasium is, how Joe got involved with Mathnasium and started his own center, and we also talk about different techniques and skills that are needed to help students with their math. Over the last year, I've had the privilege of working for Joe as an instructor at the center, and I've really enjoyed having the chance to sharpen my elementary math skills and also learn more about tutoring from Joe and the other instructors there. I hope that you will enjoy the following conversation and learn from his expertise. Welcome, Joe, to the Everyday Expertise Podcast. It's really good to have you here, and I'm excited to talk to you this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks, Roland, for having me here. I'm happy to be here and tell you all about Mathnasium and my story of how I got here.
Yeah, that's excellent. So, just as my first general question is, what's kind of life looking for you currently? What are some of the things that keep you busy?
Work always has like a lot of daily tasks. Just today, this afternoon, I was in on a day where we're closed, just kind of getting some vacuuming done and catching up on some emails and stuff like that. And with a lot of, over the last few months, a lot of what my work's been doing is adjusting the business to work through COVID. So a lot of disinfecting protocols, and we have a brand new scheduling system in place, which is a lot of added correspondence with parents and stuff like that. So that's kind of what's keeping me busy right now, and then just home life as well. Yeah,
very good. So is your full-time job running the center and working at running your Mathnasium center, etc.?
Oh yeah, more than a full-time job. But keeps me busy for sure. Always lots to do every day. So it's just my only job right now.
So how many hours are you open per week like that? You have students coming in?
Yeah, so we're open Monday to Thursday from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. and then Sundays 11 to 4. And a lot of people will kind of look at those opening or the hours that we're open and kind of be puzzled because it's obviously not matching up with a typical 9 to 5 or most restaurants or most places to be open or noon to 9 like a restaurant or something like that. But with 5 hours in a day, we find it's enough time to get all the students in that we want to get in.
Yep.
And then the other kind of thing is that almost all of our employees are university students.
Right, yeah.
So they're kind of typically only available in the afternoon. And then also all the students we teach are typically at school during the day.
Right,
so they're only starting to be available around 3 o'clock anyways. So
you're working around school hours and things like that.
Exactly. And then the Sunday shift is kind of a really common thing that Mathnasiums do throughout, or Sunday or Saturday. I kind of prefer the Sunday, but it just gives kids a chance if they've been working on homework over the weekend to pop in on Sunday and wrap it up or make sure they're ready to go for Monday.
Yeah, very good. So in your job of running your own business and things like that, where would you say your time is split? So I know you're at the center every minute that it's open, or pretty much as long as the little over a year that I've been working there. There's maybe one day that I've seen that you haven't been there. Maybe it's been a few more than that.
Yeah,
so I know you're pretty faithful with it.
Maybe 3 days or 4 days I've missed over the 2.5 years we've been open. So
it's
I'm a bit
impressive.
of a control freak with things. I like to be there. The days when I'm not there, I'm usually staring at my phone looking for an email or a call of something that's gone wrong. So I almost just prefer to take the time to be there so I know everything's going well.
Yeah, well, and it's really nice for those of us that work there and for the students too, that they always know that you're going to be there. But anyway, where I was going with that, how would you say that approximately you have to split your time in running it? So you're there, 25 hours a week that you're open?
Yeah.
So kind of what percentage of your work would be when the center's open and you're running it there?
Probably I would say maybe 60-40 in terms of the time when I'm in the center teaching students and managing the center for the 60%, and then 40% of the time probably doing all the other things I need to do to keep the business up. Things as simple as sharpening pencils and cutting erasers and having different supplies ready, to things like calling parents and leads and setting up assessments and scheduling things to get new students onboarded. And then all the other odds and ends that come with running a business, just like, right now I'm settling up my year-end taxes, which is just like a lot of paperwork and stuff, or I do a lot of my own advertising. So, just like things like that take up a lot of time. So like an average day, I'm usually in there. I try to be in there by maybe noon or so on an average day. And then I take a couple hours to get the center ready and wrap up some emails and phone calls that I got to catch up on. And then by 3:00, I'm ready to open the center for the 5 hours of instruction. And then most nights I can usually leave by 8, but most nights there's usually 1 or 2 kids who have a late pickup, so you're not usually out of there till like 8:15 or so. And then some nights I find after 8 is usually a good time to call a lot of prospective leads that pile up throughout the day. So an average day I'm usually out of there around like 8:39 or so.
Yeah, very good.
Which is a great work day. I really like it. I used to be in engineering back in the day, which was a very strict like 8 to 5, and then with the expectation that you're going to stay late if you have a big project or things like that. So I find this schedule, I don't mind staying late. I don't usually end up eating dinner till like 9:30, 10 every night, but I've just gotten used to that schedule, and I don't mind having the mornings off. So it's a fun work schedule.
Yeah. Do you find then that it's kind of like pushed your time that you go to bed and then you sleep in a little bit too?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Like my alarm's set for like 9:30, 10 most mornings, which a lot of like my dad will hear that, and he's an old farmer guy, and he'll be like, it's like ridiculous, right? But then you got to kind of think I'm getting home like 4 hours later than you most nights,
so it just kind of shifts your day.
So like it's not uncommon for me to be up like midnight, 1:00, just kind of watching some TV, messing around. But it's just kind of a different schedule than the average work day.
Yeah, I always like to just find out a little bit more about my guests besides the work that they do. So, are there any hobbies or interests outside of work that you'd like to share?
Yeah, nothing too crazy. Like a big basketball fan. Been trying to play a lot more often. I used to play a lot in high school and university. And before COVID, I had found a good little local community center that had like a lunchtime basketball run, and I was going there maybe once or twice a week, which was really fun. It's a really casual group of guys to play with, and always lots of fun. And then I've been getting really into cooking in the last couple of years. So
very good.
Planning to do like a beef barbacoa tacos tomorrow. So nothing too crazy. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, and I'm also interested in learning about you. Working for you the last year or so, I've kind of learned a little bit about how we've had the maybe odd short conversation when we've had a bit of downtime or something like that about kind of how you got into working with Mathnasium and then started your own and things like that. But I'm also, I'm looking to hear a little bit more about what that story's been like. So maybe I'll start it this way. Where kind of, have you always had a love for math, or where kind of did that start, or
I definitely math was something that clicked with me a lot from a young age. And you probably have never heard me share this at the center. I never really like to talk about this because I find that like people see me kind of as a math person, and a lot of what I teach at the center is trying to teach kids that even if you don't have a natural inclination for math, hard work can overcome it. Like dedication can overcome it. Anyone can become very good at math, but there are those people who just kind of come out the womb blessed and have kind of a knack for it. And that, I think I kind of fall into that camp a little bit. My mom would tell me stories about how like I'd be like 3 or 4 years old, and she would be like driving us to the grocery store or something like that, and I'd be like counting the change in the cup, and I'd be like, Mom, there's $3.52 here, and she'd be like, that's cool.
Did you just pick that up somehow, or did she teach you?
I'm sure I would have asked about the coins.
Right,
maybe they had taught me about the coins, or like maybe I learned it from school or something. But like she never asked me to count it up or anything. But it was just something.
Adding and things like. I mean, I guess adding is counting to some degree. But that's pretty neat.
Yeah, and I don't think it was anything where I was like prodigious or like anything where I was like the next like Euler or anything like that. But definitely like. I just saw it as like a hobby almost, or like just something where it was like interesting for me to do it. And that carried throughout school. Like we would we don't see a lot of these in school anymore, but when we were in school, our age, we probably or like we did a lot of those like Mad Minute contests. I don't know if you remember
Yeah,
these.
they were around. I don't remember doing a lot of them, but yeah.
Yeah, so we did a lot, like not a lot of those, but at least like 2 or 3 times a week, where it would be like a page full of like 50
Right.
division
Yeah.
questions,
And you'd
or
see how many
50
you could do
addition
in a minute.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you get a minute, and you just had to get through as many of them as you could. And I remember I had a couple classmates, like my buddies, like Jeff and John and Dave, that we would always like compete to see how fast we could do them. And it was just like, and then we'd be like trash talking about it on the playground later. So it became like a competitive thing where it drove me to want to become better at it, because like it was something like a point of pride. Yeah.
Yeah. So did you, I mean, once you get into high school, you have to start kind of choosing some courses, choosing how much math you want to do, and how far you want to go with math. So was that always something like you were considering? Like, were you thinking of studying math beyond high school? Or?
Yeah, I guess, or when I first got into high school, and this is funny, you just kind of reminded me, I haven't thought about this in forever, but when I first got into high school, I finished grade 9 math, and I was finding it easy, and I wanted to like get to the more challenging math courses earlier. Yeah. So I had a conversation with my guidance counselor, and I took grade 10 math in second semester, grade 9, rather than my gym class, because I didn't really like gym. So I was like, I'll trade out my gym and I'll get that credit at some point before I graduate, which I didn't get until grade 12.
Okay.
But I did my grade 10 math in the second portion of grade 9, and then I took my grade 11 academic in grade 10.
Okay.
And then that opened me up where I could start taking a lot more of the sciences. So I was taking like, because I was really interested in getting into like physics and chemistry courses. I found that stuff like interesting and challenging, and it also came easy to me, and it was like, it was a nice blend of like, I was interested in it, but then also like I liked having the challenge, and then just kind of knocking it down felt like satisfying. Yeah. So I definitely got into those sciences early as I could. And like, I think by the time I finished school, I had taken like all of the science and math related courses like at the academic level.
Like pretty much everything you could.
Yeah. Like I took all of data calc and advanced linear algebra. Just because I've found it was more interesting than like many other courses. Like I really was not into like history and geography and drama and arts and stuff like that. I did the required courses. My other interest was definitely English. I actually had a lot of really good times in like my with a lot of my English teachers. And I ended up even taking a couple like creative writing courses and writing for the school newspaper, doing like a little sports section for a little bit, for a couple of the issues. But those were definitely my kind of big pursuits in school, were math, science, and then English as well.
So did you end up going to university right out of high school then, or?
I actually took a 5th year pretty much purely for sports, because I really liked being on the basketball team, and I was doing cross country that year, so I really wanted to stay, and I had a really good team that I liked working with, and my coaches were great, and I didn't want to leave it behind, and I didn't really have a university course that I was like dying to get into. I couldn't really decide exactly what I wanted to do. And then also a good friend of mine, Mike Weersink, we had planned a trip to go to Chile.
Oh, neat.
And there was a family friend of ours that their aunt or great aunt lived in Chile and had lived there for a long time, and had recently bought a piece of property and was trying to improve the property to open like a women's shelter.
Okay. Neat.
So we went there and basically like chopped wood for her and cleared brush, and just kind of like took this property that was all kind of rugged and tried to clean it up so they could start doing construction and stuff like that. So like she gave us room and board for I think almost a month and a half. And then on the weekends we would travel.
Wow, that sounds like a great gig for just out of high school.
Yeah, it was our like second half of the 5th year. We kind of left I think in like March or so, and then came back by like June, I think. I'm not too sure about that timeline, but it was something around a month and a half, 2 months. And it was fantastic. Like there was a family that lived just down the road that we became really good friends with, and they had 2 teenage daughters who were like couple like within a year or 2 of us. So we made good friends with them and would like hang out and watch movies on the weekends and stuff. So no, it was a fantastic experience. So I was happy to take the time to do that in a fifth year rather than rush right into school.
Yeah, no, it sounds wise, and yeah, because sometimes if you don't take some of those opportunities when you have them, then life gets busy, and you get into university and get into a job, and then you kind of, yeah, you lose those opportunities if you don't take them sometimes.
And I feel that now because ever since I've started Mathnasium, like even getting a day away is a challenge. And now I think of like just leaving for a month and a half sounds like crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if you don't like to even go away for one day.
Yeah, no, eventually what I need to do is train someone to kind of be my replacement when I'm gone. That's definitely something I need to do on the horizon, and something I was planning to do before COVID. But this is kind of just slowed everything, where I've kind of needed my fingers on everything for the last 9 months.
Exactly, yeah, and a lot of changes and things like that too. Yeah, so I don't know if you want to talk at all about your university experience, but you can kind of, maybe moving on from taking a lot of math and science and things like that in high school, where, kind of what did you study after that? And then maybe also what led into your first interactions with Mathnasium, kind of how that came to be.
Yeah, for sure. So university, I went to McMaster for engineering. The reason I chose engineering was mostly because I had good interest in a lot of the subjects that were near engineering, and I had a good relationship with my guidance counselor at the school, and she said, you have the marks to get into engineering, and if you're not too sure what to do, it's a good place to start, because usually if you're in engineering and you want to switch to different subjects, like it's easier to switch into a math from an engineering rather than from a math into an engineering, or something like that. So she was like, jump in at a higher kind of a course that has a higher grade difficulty kind of to get into, and then if you want to move from there, it's easier to move to different things.
Yeah, keeps a few more options open, and et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. And I had also applied to Western for journalism, because I was also interested in kind of pursuing that a little bit, but got some suggestions from people, and I had met a cousin of mine's friend who had spent like 5 years in journalism just trying to get his first job, and we met him, and he was like, had finally secured a real job, but it's like, I got to see firsthand kind of how challenging it is to get into that industry. Whereas like engineers at the time were like in demand. Because when I was kind of going into school, it was right after the '08 market crash, and the economy was starting to boom back up again. So there was a lot of demand for like civil engineers and things like that, because there was a lot of new
new construction.
New construction,
like
and like a lot of cities and like municipalities were putting out new tenders to like improve bridges and roads and stuff like that.
See,
So there was just a lot of work on the horizon. So it made it for like, there was a good possibility that there was a lot of job opportunities. Yeah.
So I mean, I've seen your wall and your degree there on the wall. So you went through with you stuck with your engineering all the way through then.
Yep. Finished it in 5 years. I had to take a year or two to kind of catch up a couple courses here and there that didn't go so well the first time, but managed to get through with the degree by the end of it. And I even had known by I think the end of my time of doing engineering that I wasn't sure if it was going to be my long-term job. I always wanted to give it a shot and see what the work life was like when I was in engineering, but I felt like I kind of ended up in engineering because it was something I was like kind of naturally inclined to, but I don't think that my real like interests were in it. I started to meet a lot of people like in the program that would like, they would go above and beyond with projects, and they would be doing like individual projects on their personal time, or they'd be like
their hobby was engineering.
Exactly. So they'd be designing like, I'm designing this like, concrete like building with like this cool like facade, and I'm just like, why are you doing this with your free time? Like, right? But they had an interest in it, and those are the people who should be in the job. And then, so I guess after I graduated, I ended up getting a student contract, and it went well. It was pretty good, but I just wasn't fully committed to the job. Just constantly found myself just like looking at the clock and just like waiting for the day to be over, and I had the capabilities to do the job, but like I just the type of person where if I'm not fully invested and I'm not interested in it, it feels like kind of a slog for me. Whereas like if I'm interested in it, like it doesn't feel like work. Like at Mathnasium, I'm willing to like work, but because it doesn't feel like
Yeah.
work so much. I'm interested, and I can see the work paying off in different areas.
Yep. Yep.
And in engineering, it felt very like bureaucratic and
Oh, yeah.
like managing rules. Like, yeah, like when I got into it, I had more hopes, I think, of that we'd be doing more like interesting design.
Oh,
But
yeah.
when you get in the field, a lot of the practicality of it, and especially the areas where I was working, was you're working in like rural Ontario. You're going to be doing farms and bridges
Okay.
and roads and
Yeah.
guide rails and stuff. And, it only gets so interesting kind
Yeah.
of, unless you have that real passion for
Yeah,
it that some
yeah.
people do. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating that that you were able to recognize that maybe it's not the thing that I want to keep doing or want to keep pursuing. So
Yeah.
how long did you work as an engineer then, or did you
Yeah,
have a
so I
job in
spent 1 year on a student contract
Okay.
with one company and Exeter, and did some good work for them. But after the year of my contract, they let me go, and then spent about 6 months doing just different part-time jobs around the area until I found another position. And same kind of line of work. This one was a little bit more oriented on like barns and things like that. But
Okay.
and it was some interesting work. I really value like the job, the time that I spent there, and what I learned to do there. And yeah, it was good, but definitely just not my passion. So
Yeah.
after a year there, they let me go, and it was one of those things. Like in the conversation when I was let go, they were like, I knew that I didn't have a passion for the job. They had kind of sniffed me out at that point and realized
Yeah.
that he's not as committed, that we're looking for a young junior engineer
Right.
who because they're looking for someone who's going to maybe someday be a principal of the company, right?
Okay, yeah.
And work their way up there.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I was like, I just wasn't wanting to put in 60, 70 hours in a week
Yeah.
and prove myself and cut my teeth to get to that position. Because I knew that that wasn't even a goal of mine. Like I didn't
Yeah.
even want to be in that position. So
Yeah, exactly.
and
yeah.
it wasn't just me who came to this realization. Like my now wife Ariel was like, "You don't seem very happy doing this job, right?" And even my parents would mention it, where it's like, maybe there's some other avenues we can start to look for.
Yeah.
So then after I finished that job there, I think shortly after, I think it was like September 2016 or 2015. I can't remember which year it was, but I started working at the Mathnasium in London.
Okay.
Yeah, just as a part-time job. So I
So,
started.
How'd you find it, or how'd you get connected with it?
Well, actually, before that, I was doing tutoring independently.
Oh, okay.
So I
Yep.
had just posted an ad on Kijiji, and I had been doing it as like a part-time job
Yep.
for the last like year, just to kind of pick up spare change, get
Mm-hmm.
some extra money. And they saw my ad on Kijiji, and they said, "Hey, do you want to just come work for
Oh,
us
okay.
instead?" Yeah.
Yep.
So I started working with them, and yeah, I loved my time there. I really found that I had a real knack for teaching, and really liked working with the kids was the biggest thing.
Yep.
Like just the atmosphere of working in a classroom compared to working in like an engineering office
Yeah.
was just like night and day. Like not a lot of people in the engineering office felt like they were excited to be there.
Yep.
Like I think they all loved their position, and they wanted to be engineers, but the daily work I think was not like the most
Yeah.
energizing or most
Yeah.
it was a bit of a slog, I think, for most people, and it had its payoffs for sure, like financially, definitely. Like
Yeah.
it's lucrative in that terms, but it's definitely a lot of long hours and a lot of
Yeah.
finicky code details and calculations and things like that. Whereas working in a classroom, just like the energy of the kids
Yeah.
and like the lightheartedness of it
Yeah.
was so much more. I felt a lot more at home there.
Yeah. How much do you think working with kids was a part of that? Like, do you think that that's part of what brings you joy? Or
Oh,
what,
big time. Yeah. Like just, I mean, yeah, like I really like working with the kids. It's fun hearing all their stories, and they're always ready to like joke and be like, they're always ready to play around and things like that. And a lot of what I do at work is stopping them from doing that and getting them back on task and doing more work and sticking to their math. But the times when we get to joke around or they have funny stories from school are just like invaluable. They're just like, they just make my day. So
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah.
That's great. How did you so you said you had been doing some tutoring on your own, like putting your own ad and I guess arranging things yourself, that kind of deal. So how did that compare to then your tutoring at Mathnasium? Like, was it a easy decision once you started doing it at Mathnasium to move to that?
Yeah, the things I really liked about Mathnasium was that you really got to build a relationship with the kids.
Okay. Yeah.
And you really got to like maintain their progress and push their progress along on like a nearly a daily level, or like every other day with most students.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you know, from working in the center, like majority of our students are probably coming like 3 times a week, if
Yep.
not more. So you really get to build a good repertoire with them, and after you work with them for like 2-3 weeks, you can really identify where their weaknesses are
Yep.
and put work in it and see improvements within like a week.
Yeah.
Whereas when I was working as an independent tutor, most of the time when you're working with independent tutoring, it's typically once a week for an hour.
Okay.
Is what most families end up settling on.
Yep. And you're just helping them with their homework, most likely?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like when I was working independent tutoring, there was a couple kids that I've been working with for like over a year, and we would constantly be progressing with their homework into more challenging things. But then you would constantly be hitting the same roadblocks where they had weaknesses in their skills,
because they don't have that base. And,
exactly. So they're missing some. They're not super strong in some kind of algebra aspect or exponent laws or something. And you can, and those same concepts progress throughout like grade 10 and 11. So like there was one student I can think of where I started with him in grade 10, and right off the bat I was like, oh, his algebra's not good, but we'll kind of figure it out as we go. And then even by the time I was like working with him, by the time he was finishing his grade 11 course, I'm like, those same issues are still there, right? Whereas with Mathnasium, we get to really tackle those root issues that pop back up in their homework over and over.
Yeah, and we'll get into that a little bit more, I think, as we talk maybe more about some of the things that you do there. So back to your story here, where did the idea come to you to start your own center, or to go off on your own with that?
So kind of picking up off the story of where I was getting out of engineering, and my parents were saying you should maybe look for some different avenues of where you could build a career with like what you have with your engineering degree. And part of the first avenue I really started looking at was like going through the OCT and becoming like a full-fledged teacher.
Okay. Yeah.
But I quickly found out that an engineering degree doesn't really match up with a lot of the requirements they're looking for. So like most people going into teaching will take a specific amount of courses knowing what the OCT kind of requires for certification. So like you might know this, you're taking math right now and probably looking to like have a math as a teachable for like if you get into teaching, right?
Yep.
So like you'd be taking a lot of like classic math courses and then other courses that will give you more teachables later. But when I went there, the types of things on my transcript really didn't apply, or they were so specific because they were in engineering. So like I had 4 good courses that would qualify for like being on my transcript if I were to apply for like the OCT or getting into teachers college, which were like my Calc 1, 2 and linear algebra 1 and 2 in my first 2 years. But then after that, when you're in engineering, things get super specific into what you're working on. So like I had like 4 years worth of steel and concrete design courses. Like I had a whole bunch of like water treatment courses, transportation design courses, things like that. And they said like these are related to physics, but we can't really say that this qualifies you to be a physics teacher. So like,
you would have actually had to do more courses just to get into.
And I was almost looking at going to a college in the States to do these extra physics courses and like math courses, but then I'm looking at the outlines of these courses and like these are courses that are easier than the courses that I did in engineering, and I'm like, do I really want to spend a whole year just kind of getting the ticket so I can go get another ticket so I can be a teacher? And it just like it suddenly became like a 3-year process after just finishing 5 years of engineering school. So I was like, this is not really the avenue I want to go into, or I didn't really feel ready to do 3 more years of schooling before I got into teaching. And then also the thing with teaching at the time is there wasn't a lot of openings, or like some of the guys,
you weren't even guaranteed a job necessarily, like even when you're done with teachers college.
Exactly. There was a guy I worked with at the Mathnasium in London who was doing like mat leave covers and like when people had to leave for like injuries or whatever, when
supply
they had medical
teaching
leave, and doing supply teaching and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he said he had to probably do that for a year or 2 before he was going to get a permanent, right? And I was like, so this is looking at like 4 or 5 years minimum before I'm getting into a permanent position. And I was like, and then also like the financial aspect of going back to school for that long. It's just like, after just getting out of school for engineering. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. But then one day when I was working at Mathnasium more and more, my dad brought up like, why don't you just start your own Mathnasium franchise or see what opportunities there are for that? And I had never really thought of it. And when he first brought it up, I was like, I don't know if I'm qualified for this. Like, I've never ran a business before. I don't really know the first thing about like, hiring people or like any of the like aspects of opening a business. But he encouraged me to kind of pursue it. And then just kind of one thing led to another. The franchise kind of salesman at Mathnasium was like fantastic. And
nice.
they liked my background, especially because I had worked as an instructor at Mathnasium for 2 years. And they liked my background in like engineering and thought that I would be good kind of fresh blood in the system.
Yeah.
So, and I was really, really lucky that Waterloo as a location popped up. It's definitely a very like desirable location to be in. And I got really lucky because I believe, if I have the story right, is that someone had been pursuing the Waterloo location with Mathnasium and things had kind of fallen through. I don't really know exactly why. But then the opportunity was just kind of right there on my doorstep. And he was like, I remember the very first call I had with him. He's like, I have Windsor available. I have Woodstock available. But I did just have Waterloo pop up like last week. And that is a gem. And so I just kind of jumped on it and started running with it. And then before I knew it, we were up and running.
Nice.
Yeah.
So does Mathnasium choose where their locations are? Or like, did you not have much say in where you could put it?
Well, they have things mapped out in terms of like locations.
Because they don't want them too close together, right?
Exactly, yeah. So like the locations, and when Mathnasium drew up the locations for Canada originally, they drew them up much larger than they did in the States. So like my territory covers the entire city of Waterloo, basically.
Right, okay.
Now, I think down the road, if I showed that there was enough interest in the area, I could probably open a second center in the area.
Okay, yeah.
If I found the demand was there. But then in terms of picking my location inside the territory, they give you some flexibility, but they also have some constraints on what type of plaza they want you in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they want it to be like a couple of the restrictions were like they want it on the first floor. They wanted like a glass front so you can kind of see in. Yeah. So things like that, just to make it more presentable. And they're looking for a certain look. Yeah.
So maybe we should clear up and make sure that everyone understands what we're talking about here. But so Mathnasium is a company / business itself. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, it's a tutoring company. Yep. And it's a franchise.
Yeah.
So different people, or like whoever is interested in buying a franchise buys the rights to a franchise, and Mathnasium supplies you with all the kind of training and material and resources to run the business.
And you get support and things like that.
Yeah. So like they're constantly doing like little expos and webinars to give us new information about like, best practices. They're constantly doing updates with the curriculum. Like just last year, Ontario announced they're going to have more of a focus on like coding and
some financial stuff maybe too.
I think more financial math as well, like more tax related stuff. So like we're going to be developing more curriculum to for like Mathnasium to match up with that school curriculum. And then always like they have a full-fledged team of like they have kind of a person and head of each little division of what you need to like start and run a business. So like they have like a marketing division and a head of marketing. And then when we have our regional meetings, like he'll have a little 20-minute spiel of like, okay, this is what we've been developing. This is like the new resources we have available to you. So
there was some help, like you talked about how you had no experience running a business or anything like that, but you had some help and support with some of those things even getting going.
Mathnasium was great at the start. So like the process of like starting to get into the business, I found was like very interesting. They make you fly out to LA to their headquarters in Los Angeles in California. The first time you go out there, I think you have to go 3 different times. The first one is called like a discovery day. So you go out there and you go to the headquarters and you see what it's all about, and they kind of tell you what other Mathnasium franchises are and what you can expect. And it's more of that time's more for the franchisee to kind of see what they're getting into and see if they want to go forward with it. And then they also bring you down there for 2 different stages of training.
Okay.
So the first stage of training is much more geared towards real estate, like finding the right real estate, like setting up stuff like in terms of getting like your drawings and approvals with the city and going through with construction staging and stuff like that. So like they really gave a lot of assistance in those areas that I hadn't really worked on before. Now, actually, I was lucky that I knew the construction staging
Right,
part of
yeah.
things from engineering pretty
Yeah.
well, and also how to get the drawings from like electrical and mechanical and
Yep.
architectural drawings. I was like, I've done this before. I've put together blueprints. So
Yeah.
that was still a process to learn to do it myself, but I at least had some awareness of it. But in terms of like the real estate, I was jumping in totally blind there. Like
Okay,
doing
yeah.
like looking at commercial real estate rates in terms of like, square footage and tenant allowance and like,
Yeah. Wow.
CAM percentages and stuff like that. You're like, you don't even know what those things are at the
Yeah,
beginning. So,
exactly.
but they actually had a really good like contact that Mathnasium provided that would kind of negotiate for you with
Oh, okay.
with the landlord to make sure you got a pretty good deal.
Okay, well, nice. So yeah, like, and I can see how that would be really nice for not having much experience to like. I was just thinking about starting with a franchise model, like joining a franchise like you did, versus trying to do the same thing on your own and completely starting fresh on your own. And I can see
Yeah.
how there's, I mean, you're paying the fees and things for it, but you're getting a lot of benefit from it too, I guess.
Yeah,
from
especially
starting
in
off with
those
that.
early days, they
Yeah.
definitely gave me a lot of training and made sure that we weren't going to be kind of stranded out on our own.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first stage of training was much more about like getting your center location in place, and then also they did a lot of training of like hiring your first instructors
yep.
and setting up payroll and setting up like your accounting and stuff like that,
Yep.
so that you could kind of get things going. And then you went out after. So after your first training, your kind of objective after that was sign your lease,
Okay.
get your location, and then once you have a location, then you can kind of proceed to stage 2 of training.
Okay.
And then stage 2 was much more oriented to like how to teach the material, how to like advertise, how to get leads, how to convert leads, all
Okay,
those little things that I had never done before.
Yeah. I guess you would have had some experience with teaching like the
Yes. Oh,
curriculum?
yeah. So like, yeah, I went in with flying colors on that stuff. Like
Yeah.
I that was one thing where that gave me a lot of confidence, because there was a lot of things that I was like, I don't know if I can tackle this whole project on my own. But I
Yeah.
was like, once I get the building up and running and I'm teaching, I knew the Mathnasium
Yeah.
curriculum well enough. In London, I had worked my way up before I left there and started pursuing my own location. I had been like building the binders
Okay,
at the London location. So I knew the Mathnasium curriculum inside and out, and I knew like which topics certain kids needed and how to like address certain concepts that they weren't understanding. So like from a curriculum standpoint and from a math learning standpoint,
Yeah.
I definitely had a lot of confidence in that. But it came to things like hiring or like doing phone calls with parents. Like I remember like in the first week, like getting phone calls with parents and like my voice cracking and like not being able to like put my words together and being like nervous and and having questions where you're like, oh, I don't have a good answer to that question, or I don't know exactly how we do this. But they definitely gave us a lot of training to help us to be ready for that.
Nice. So that was mostly in your second trip to LA. Like you said, you went there 3 times.
Yeah. So the first one for the Discovery Day was basically like 2 days. You just kind of fly in, they show you the place, they kind of schmooze you a little bit, wine dine you a little bit, and then you're out of there. And then the first stage of training was a shorter one. I believe it was only like 4 days, because it was more about like giving you the ability to get the real estate and get the location locked down and get kind of the more like bricks and mortar aspect of things.
Was your head like spinning when you left that?
A little bit, yeah. Luckily I had the support of them around me, and like a lot of the early things, like I remember setting up my first accounting through QuickBooks, and I was like, what is all, like, I don't know how any of this works. But they set up all my chart of accounts for me and showed where to like delegate different amounts of money, and having that, I think his name was Kelly, the person who helped me out with the real estate, was fantastic, because I would basically like, he came to me with a list of like, hey, here's 5 like commercial retail spots that you might be interested in, or here's these plazas, and he kind of gave me like a breakdown of pros and cons, where he's like, this one's a little more expensive, but it's in a it's a newer plaza, or like just, so a lot of the support there helped out a lot. But yeah, in the early days I was like just kind of holding on and just trying to get to the point where like the doors were open.
So what did the third training session focus on, or the third time that you were in LA?
Mostly like that one was probably the easiest one for me, because that one was where they were teaching mostly how to teach the Mathnasium curriculum,
Oh,
how to
okay.
administer the
Because
curriculum.
there was two. Was there two training things?
Yeah,
Like the third time you went was the training
third one
thing.
was also training. Yeah, so
Gotcha.
the second kind of stage I was there was the first one for training, and it was mostly about like getting the real estate and things like that figured out. And then the third one was like, we got to get you ready for parents coming in the door,
Yep.
kids coming in the door, how to like train your instructors, how to manage parents,
Yep.
how to kind of run all the things. And mostly they were teaching you all of the like Mathnasium specific things at that point.
Okay.
Of like
Yep.
how the curriculum works, how to run the software to build the learning plans for the kids and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. How long approximately was the process from when you kind of applied for a franchise until your doors were open?
Yeah. So like probably, I guess I first got incorporated June 2017. And that was when, I got really serious about it when,
Okay.
cause like you kind of, I got the incorporation set up, signed the lease, and then, that's when it all kind of came official was, so I did the second stage of training, I believe in early June, and then signed my lease and got incorporated mid-June. And then, construction always takes longer than you think it is, because you have to get all these drawings and approvals. And then I think we started construction like right after Christmas or so.
Okay.
And then around in January. And then we opened by like mid-March, March 17th, I think was our first
So it was
day.
about 9 months?
Yeah,
Okay.
about 9 months to get everything going with all the training and all like the drawings and construction and all that. Yeah.
Were you like focused on it fully at that time, or were you still working at the other place?
I had
during
a
that too?
part-time job at like I was working at a butcher shop, and I was
nice,
also
yeah.
working at Mathnasium for a little bit of it until it kind of took more of my attention
Right,
away from it. It was kind of a funny time though, because I had stopped working a lot of my part-time jobs because I was expecting there to be a lot more work, but a lot of it was just kind of waiting on my hands a little bit. Where, like,
I see, till things came together.
Yeah, like, or I was, waiting on this architectural group to finish the drawings, and then I send them to the city, and then you have to wait, like, 2-3 weeks, a month to get them approved, and then, like, you're kind of just in limbo a lot of the times for those months.
Yeah, very good. So once you got going then and opened up, was it a lot of work to kind of build up a base of clients and students signed up for the tutoring and things like that? Like, how did that process go?
Yeah, in the early days, it's like you really got to convince people, like especially those very first customers, like you have no reviews, you have no like word of mouth going around, you have no history in the community.
Yeah, like did people in Waterloo know what Mathnasium was, or were you usually explaining kind of what
I
you
had
did?
to. I still to this day, most people that come in don't know it's a franchise or don't like. I've never heard of it.
I had never heard of it until I saw it like pop up in the plaza there, and that's the first. Then I looked it up online. That's the first I had ever heard of it.
Yeah, and like if you're lucky, like Mathnasium does a good job of running like some national ad campaigns, but like they often run them on more kid-oriented things. So like they'll put them on the radio, but it's like it's hard to catch radio ads, and who listens to the radio that much anymore anyways, right? Like most people are on Spotify and stuff. Yeah. And then a lot of the ads they run are on like YTV and like at times when cartoons are on and stuff like that, because they find I think that's like going to be their target kids, demographic, right? Yeah. Yeah. So most people don't know that it's a franchise. So in those early days, I really had to like kind of speak more about like the mathematical side of things and demonstrate that I had a good knowledge in those things. Yeah. And the other thing that I really was able to lean on was I often spoke of my experience of working in London, because I could say like, I've done these things before and I've worked with kids like this before, just not at this location. Yeah.
Yeah. I can see how that would have been really helpful to have had that experience with the company and know kind of what it's offering, and you could explain things from your perspective with that. So anything else that you wanted to say about kind of that story of getting set up and getting to the point now? Are you?
No, it's basically since then it's just been a great period of growth. Nice. Like there's been some hiccups here and there, like we've always had to sometimes adjust our systems to match with like demand and have new ways of like making it so we can facilitate serving more clients and more students. Yeah. Yeah, but it's been great. Like up until COVID, we were right before COVID. Like March last year was one of our best months ever, and
Mm-hmm.
we were on a great trajectory. And we're almost actually back to where we were before now,
Yeah.
which is great. I'm really happy to be there again. But yeah, it definitely seems like there's a demand in the community, and we've had a lot of good luck of like word of mouth because I
Mm-hmm.
compare now to the old days of when we were first opening, like I was mentioning, those first customers, we really had to convince them, like, no, you got to trust me. Like, I know what I'm doing. Like, don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
Like, leave your kid with me. It's going to be fine. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, which, which is a scary thing for a parent to do with a new business that's never been there.
Yeah.
But as compared to now, like parents are just like, take my kid, sign them up. Like, cause they'll read the reviews or they'll hear from their
Yeah.
friend that, oh, their kid did it and they had really good success. So now people are just like walking in,
Mm-hmm.
with an expectation or like with a, knowing our history kind
Yeah.
of. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that word of mouth is one of the strongest
Oh,
ways
by a
to sign
mile.
people up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been like, I find much more like we do a lot of local advertising, mostly online through like Facebook and Google, but we'll do
Okay.
some odd print ads here and there in different newspapers and local publications. But almost all of our leads, I believe, come from word of mouth or
Mm-hmm.
just location. That's another big one.
Oh,
People
okay.
just
Yeah.
see us in the plaza
Yeah.
and they see kids in there and they're like, oh, I want my kid to do that too.
Yeah.
So
Or their child's having a struggling with math, maybe especially in high school or something like that, and they'll see it like, oh, Mathnasium. I
yeah,
wonder if that can help. So the name is probably
yeah, it's
help.
definitely a good name. It's
Yeah.
catchy.
Yeah, that's great. You already mentioned some of the things that you really enjoy it, but I put the question down here. What do you enjoy about your job? So what would you say is one of the favorite things about running a Mathnasium franchise?
I'd say the biggest thing is myself is that I get to kind of run it how I want to run it.
Mm-hmm.
I've never really been the greatest with like bosses in the past, or I would often see the way they would do things, and I'd be like, why don't you do it this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now I get to make those decisions now. But now that I'm on the other side, I see people analyze how I do things, and I'm like, just let me run it my way, right? Like, or like, maybe it's not perfect, but you know, it's the way it works for us.
Uh-huh.
But the reason I really like that is like you're accountable to no one but yourself.
Yep.
So like if things are going poorly, that just means I have to work harder or I
Mm-hmm.
have to reanalyze where things are going
Yep.
wrong and change the process or change the systems. And I really like that. Yeah. And the other aspect I really like with the job is like also that I'm there is like I get to kind of build the environment or create the atmosphere. And I really put a lot of effort into like trying to keep it really lighthearted with the kids and keeping on task as well and working hard. But like being able to keep that environment like light and easy is nice for both the kids because they can come in and feel comfortable. But then also for me, I don't have to feel like I'm like a slave driver
Yeah.
or anything like that where I'm like cracking the whip and being like this evil teacher. I can kind of be nicer and then it creates a nice positive atmosphere for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and thanks for sharing that story. It's fascinating to kind of hear how people get to the places that they're at, and yeah, so that's fascinating to hear.
Yeah, it's strange. I never would have thought that I'd be here now.
Yeah,
I never
that's
really pegged myself for a teacher. I remember I had one teacher of mine in like grade 5 who told my mom like, "Oh, he's going to be a teacher
Okay.
one day about
Yeah.
me," and I was like, "I don't want to be a teacher," but lo and behold, here I am.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I would know a few of the answers to the next section here that I want to talk about, but also thinking I'm gonna learn some new things as well. And this is kind of thinking about Mathnasium as a whole. So, which as being a franchise owner of it, you kind of get to use their curriculum and their support and things like that. So yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about what they are and what you know about that.
Yeah.
So maybe to start, what are some of the main philosophies or vision or ways that Mathnasium approaches math tutoring?
Yeah, one of the biggest catchphrases that I love the most about Mathnasium is it's pretty simple. They just say confidence in math, confidence in life, and it sounds kind of corny, and it's like, but I've seen it so many times with kids where they can do the math. They've lost their confidence or their will to kind of tackle it. they've maybe gotten knocked down by a test and they now kind of feel like they're not good at math. And rather than try to take the problem full on, they try to just avoid it or get through
Yeah.
it as quick as possible and not really take an honest look at, okay, like how does this work? How do I work through this and put the time in to learn it? They'd rather just kind of fly through it and because they don't like it very much, right? And,
Yeah.
that speaks to me as like a big lack of confidence really
Yeah.
overall. And a lot of these kids, when you get them feeling more comfortable about it and feeling more confident in it and that they're confident to kind of tackle the challenge on their own, it just opens so many doors for them. Like, I've just seen a lot of kids who were struggling with math, spent a year or two at Mathnasium, worked really hard, and like just totally changed the trajectory of where they were going to go in their lives.
Yeah.
And just seeing those like a couple of, and it's not like every kid has that experience. I don't want to say that we can transformatively change any kid's life, but there's cases where like you're just like, wow, that's gonna totally like set them on a different path in life. And and I think that's one of the biggest philosophies of Mathnasium. And the founder of Mathnasium, Larry Martinek, speaks a lot about that, where like kids don't hate math, they hate being frustrated, they hate feeling stupid, they hate feeling like they aren't in on what everyone else understands,
and they don't get it, like they hate not getting it.
And they're like, I don't understand it, I don't get it, I don't like math. And it's like, no, you don't like, it's not you don't like math, it's like you don't like the situation you're in where you're feeling those feelings right now, right? And you just got to put some work and build your confidence back up and get to a point where you're ready to take those challenges on again. So I think that's one of the biggest philosophies of Mathnasium is like, no kid is left behind. Like there's no one's in a position where they can't learn. Like everyone can come in and become confident again and then start to be successful in math and other subjects again.
Well, that's really neat. And I mean, I know the ways that the Mathnasium approach to helping students that are struggling with math and also, I mean, ones that are doing fine with math too. But yeah, I hadn't actually heard that about the whole life, like bringing the life thing into it too. That's really neat because it's so true. Like there's struggles outside of math that we're going to run into in life that we can often deal with in a lot, maybe similar ways, like by keep trying, sticking to it, or finding out how to do it, and not being afraid to fail, that kind of thing.
And I feel like a lot of like the allegory that I bring to math a lot of the time is like exercise or working out or like improving for a sport, where like it doesn't come easy. You can't go for one run and be a marathon runner. Like you can't do it once and suddenly be an expert at it. And I feel like a lot of students get kind of confused about that because a lot of other subjects, and maybe I'm not an expert in this, so maybe I'm not completely right, or some teachers might have some kickback on this, but like I think a lot of other subjects, you kind of read the material and you interpret it and you regurgitate it. You kind of like, you read it, you understand it, and you spit it back out. You can't do that with math.
Right.
You can't like look at one explanation of how one question works and then be like, oh, now I know how all algebra works. It's like there's so many little variations and pocket cases and little twists and turns that you have to really learn. And then also like the more you do it, the better you get at it. Like exercise as well. So
I follow a few education people or teachers on Twitter, and still a remnant from when I was teaching a few years ago. And I saw a really good tweet just a couple days ago where he was saying that you never tell a kid to take like 5 shots in basketball, and then that's enough practice to be a good shooter. But I think we often do that in math instruction, or like we'll do that at school and I'll see it with assignments that students bring in too, where they're like kind of given a smattering of questions off the page of things that they're supposed to practice, like in algebra or what you're talking about. And it's just taking 5 shots in basketball. You're not gonna have a jump shot by the end of that. And it's the same in math. You got to keep practicing it. And it just struck me like that was a really good analogy. I thought that with the basketball thing, it takes practice. It takes it.
Oh, of course. And I use that all the time. I always say that like math is something you do, not that you learn. Like it's an active thing. It's a thing where you have to participate in it. You can't just kind of like zone out and and use previous knowledge that you have.
Yeah.
You have to be there in that situation and tackle the
Yeah.
problem and see all the variables, but like all the parts to it and deal with it as it comes to you.
Yeah, like I heard you telling someone fairly recently, I think, that it doesn't work well in math to study by just reading through your notes.
No.
And
we get a lot of high schoolers who come in and I'll see them looking through the solution pages to the homework.
Yeah.
And they're just reading through the solutions and they're like, okay, so I see that and then I do that and then I need to do this. And it's like, that doesn't mean that you know how to do it now.
Yeah.
Like another like common thing I'll say to kids a lot of time is like, can you watch a lot of YouTube videos on mountain biking and then now be a really good mountain biker?
Yeah.
No, just because you've seen someone else do it doesn't mean you know how to do it
Yeah.
now. For a lot of other things, you can kind of learn that. There are certain concepts that you can learn visually by like, or like, by reading or hearing it, but math I feel like is not that.
Yeah.
Of almost all the subjects, it's the
Yeah.
most active.
And I've had that too in a class or even on a YouTube video where someone just does a brilliant job of explaining a math concept and it makes perfect sense as they're going through and explaining it. But yeah, 10 minutes later I sit down and try to do it and I'm like, I got to go back and got to go back and watch that again. I do not remember how to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we'll get back into some of maybe the process and how you help students especially. But do you know any of the history of Mathnasium, like how it started? Or
Yeah. Mathnasium actually does a really good job of telling the history of how Mathnasium came about.
Okay.
And like almost all of the original founders and people who built the business in the early days are still part of it now.
Oh, neat. Wow.
So the kind of the big head of the franchise is Larry Martinek, and he started the first Mathnasium in 2002 in California, in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay, so it's not that old then.
No, only
Okay.
like I guess 18 years now. Yeah, and it's really boomed. Like I believe there are over 1,000 centers worldwide now, and I think about 800 in the States. And there's certain states that it's very popular in, and mostly because there's been a couple franchisees who've had really good luck and been really aggressive.
Nice.
Like there's a couple, I think there's one franchisee in Florida who has, I think, like almost like 20 centers or something like that.
Wow.
And like, so I think like in California, it's really big. Florida, Michigan, New York, a couple pockets have very high amounts of them. But either way, Larry started this franchise in 2002. He was a math teacher and taught grade 9 and 10 math. And I believe the story goes is that somewhere around like 95 or something like that, California changed to a different method of curriculum. I think it was called Common Core.
Okay.
And when they switched that to that new methodology, there were a lot of kids who had done maybe 4 years of the curriculum one way, and then it suddenly switches in their grade 5, and they're suddenly being taught things a different way. And also the staging of the curriculum was being taught at different years. So there may have been things they missed out on their teaching.
Oh, I see.
So Larry was getting a lot of these kids in grade 9 and 10, and he was like, these kids don't have their base skills. Like I'm trying to teach them grade 10 level material, but they still lack like grade 7 and 8 level algebra that's required for this.
I see. Okay.
So that's where where it all started from, is he started assessing kids. So he would give them an assessment, which was like basically a question or two from like their entire previous year's curriculum. So like if they're in grade 9, they would do a little test that would kind of cover a question or two for everything from grade 8, and he would try to pinpoint, okay, like what skills are you missing? What do we need to work on so that you can be ready for this course? And then he just turned it into a business. Because he found like there was a huge demand for it. And then I don't think it grew super fast at the beginning. Like I think it was just one location to start.
Okay.
And he was definitely like building and developing the systems, and then he got paired up with a few more business-oriented people who really liked what Larry was doing and saw the demand for it in the region.
Yeah.
And then they started kind of coming together with the plans of how to create it into a franchise and really let it grow.
Yeah. So that's really neat that it grew into that. But was it like, is there something unique or especially niche about the curriculum, or that allowed it
Larry is honestly like the foundation of all the curriculum of where it comes from. Like
he writes a lot of it, or?
Yeah, like a lot of it, and like a lot of the conceptual stuff, and even like little phrases. Like one of my favorite ones that he says, which is like the corniest thing, but it sticks with me to this day, is like the denomination of the fraction is the name of the fraction. So like denomination is the name of the fraction, because kids will always do that thing where like 2 sevens plus 3 sevens is 5/14. But it's like, no, you don't add the sevens. That's just the name of the fraction. It's the type of the fraction.
Oh, yeah.
So
it's little helpful things like that to remember and think about it.
And also just breaking things down into the simplest terms. Like he was the exact opposite of that type of math teacher that speaks in like full mathematical terminology. He was like, let's do the opposite of that, because kids get intimidated by that, and they don't respond to it. Like when you say like, okay, now transform the coordinate, they're like, what? But you're like, if you say now rotate the point, they're like, oh, I get that. Like, so it's about using terminology and methodology that is geared to be more simple. I find a lot of math teachers, they're so passionate about math and they love math so much, and they're such serious math people that they only know how to do it that way, and they don't want to dumb it down or they don't want to make it easier because they hold it in such high regard, and they want to present it as this, high like ivory tower thing that only the like most intelligent people can reach. But that's not true. Like you can break it down to simpler forms and have people be able to understand it easier.
And I think a big part of that, like you'd been talking about, is the terminology that's used. Like if we insist that we always call it a numerator and a denominator, like versus being just okay with calling it the top and the bottom of the fraction, I think that can be a good way to maybe break down some of those barriers.
And they eventually need to learn that terminology.
For sure.
But if they're at a point where they're stuck and they're like, I hate fractions, I don't want to do anything with fractions, and you come in and you're saying, well, why? What don't you understand about the numerator and the denominator? They're like, what are you even talking about? But if you just say, oh, you just got to add the top to the top, don't add the bottoms, they're like, oh, I can do that.
Exactly.
And then as you do more and more, you're like, okay, we actually call this the numerator. And if you see this on a test, like that's what that means. So, but you can't start with that. You kind of got to like get them eased into it, and then you ramp them up later.
Is it another staple of the curriculum to kind of even try to keep the numbers fairly simple when you're starting with a new concept or something like that? Like I've noticed that and enjoy that about introducing new concepts to students.
Yeah, for sure. Like they definitely, like we do everything mental math, like so like there's no calculators allowed. So all the kids have to be doing the computations in their head as they go along, which I find is like amazing, and I wouldn't want to do it any other way. But when you're introducing a new concept, you don't want them worrying about doing the mental addition. You want them worrying about the new concept you're learning. So like, for example, when you're doing adding decimals the first time, like the first page is nice and easy numbers to actually add so that they can spend more of their mental power thinking about, okay, how do I line these decimals up? And how do I go through the process?
Yeah, very cool. So when a student comes to the center, gets signed up for the first time, I know you do kind of the assessment kind of thing, but what's kind of the process in figuring out where to start with them, etc.?
So like the first thing usually just comes with a conversation with the parent. So like just to get some general expectations, like whether the student's kind of at grade level getting B's, or whether like math has been an issue for 2 years and they're finally getting help, or like they're kids like 2 years ahead of class and they need enrichment material and they're bored in class. So it's like the first thing you want to do is kind of analyze what sort of challenge level they're looking for. So like the typical student, if they're getting C's and B's and they're doing okay, but they want to do better, the place we'll always start from is from the year before. So like if we have a grade 6 student, I'll test them at the grade 5 level assessment and try to find gaps from that year.
Okay.
We really, and also like strengths and weaknesses kind of. We really find that like almost all kids have preferences that they've developed with math even after a few years. So like some kids, decimals are the greatest. They hate fractions. Some kids, it's the total opposite. Some kids like understand multiplication in and out, avoid division questions for the death of them. And it's just like, which is odd because they're basically the same concept, but like some kids just, they have, all it takes is like one bad division test in like grade 4 and they're just like, I don't ever want to do division.
They write it off.
And they're just like, I'm bad at it. I don't like it. And that's what we're trying to really suss out with that assessment is like things they totally avoid. And that's often the first things we try to tackle with them. Because what we're trying to kind of prove to them is like these like math boogeymen that you've created are not as big a deal as you think they are. And we almost always start things out easier. Like sometimes we'll get kind of complaints, or not complaints, but comments from parents where like they'll be like, the student finds the material very easy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's intentional. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're starting out very easy because we're just trying to build confidence and get them feeling comfortable and like it's
Yeah.
something they're willing to do.
Is a parent like worried they're not getting their money's worth with a comment like that, or?
Yeah, I think so. Or like, am I kind of wasting my time here? Or like, are you guys trying to like slow roll me here? You know what I mean? And stretch this out. But it's like, it's honestly that like on the assessment, they wouldn't even attempt the questions. So we should take it as a win that they're even putting the pencil on the paper.
Yeah.
Like that's step one, is to get them doing anything. So like sometimes you'll get a student who's like, yeah, I'm having a tough time with decimal division in grade 6. And like, you give them an assessment from grade 5 and you have like a standard division question and they won't even attempt that. And it's like, we can't be looking at decimal division. We got to go back and look at division. And I probably want to start from like 1 by 1 division. Like what's 9 divided by 3? Like just talking about the concept of what division is. Because like oftentimes awareness and exposure to it is what kills that fear. Because oftentimes that's the first hurdle to get over with the students. In the early days, like the biggest process in the first week is just building confidence and getting them feeling comfortable.
Is there kind of like a whole process or like kind of a method set up that you can use, like looking at the assessment that you like, that there are sections that you can of curriculum that you can pull from then?
And
so it's all nicely set up and things like that.
So like every question on the assessment has an associated set of worksheets that go with that question. So like so it's like we're able to pinpoint very closely, like, okay, is like they can do 3 by 1 division, but they can't do 2 by 3 division, or like, you know, like we can pinpoint exactly what it is that's giving them issues. And like something like that isn't as big of a deal. It's not a great example, but like we're looking more to see like what concepts they have an awareness in, if any at all, and then how far that awareness goes.
Would you say that that you get more students signing up that are struggling in math? That tends to be the largest group.
I'd say probably splits maybe 70-30 between students who are not doing good and looking to catch up or kind of boost their grade, versus ones who are in enrichment or just looking to kind of keep sharp.
That's I was gonna ask if there's some that are good at math and just looking for more practice.
Like we get a couple, like we have some real phenoms who are like, you know, in grade 2 looking at like grade 5 level material just because I've run out of stuff for them to work at the grade 3 and 4 levels. But like the kid's ready for it and they're able to do it, and they love the challenge. So
I'm not sure if I don't think I put the specific question down, but I've wondered about it just from your perspective of doing tutoring. You had mentioned that when you were in grade school you would have done like I think you called the Mad Minute, where you do a whole bunch of math facts in a certain amount of time. And am I correct in my understanding that Ontario kind of got away from learning math facts and that kind of thing?
Well, two fronts. I mean, they definitely got away from the high pressure timed tests because as much as they instilled like competitiveness and confidence in the top portion of the class, I think they ended up being a real confidence killer for the bottom half of the class, which I kind of almost agree with them. As much as I benefited from and enjoyed those Mad Minutes, they can be done outside of school. Parents or like extra like math clubs or things like that can be giving that material to the students who want to excel. But for the other students in the class who like are struggling to get even 1 or 2 of the questions done and watching their peers like get the whole page done, they often just kind of throw their hands up and they're like, I don't get this stuff. I don't like math anymore and I don't want to do it. And we almost want to more avoid that situation at all, rather than have the top of the class get a little bit more of a benefit. And then also I think that the last few years of the Ontario curriculum, maybe the last like 5 to 10 years, has been focused a lot more on understanding of why concepts work, and getting away from a lot of the by rote. Which there's no correct answer, and there's having everything by rote and having no understanding is not going to work, and having everything all understanding and having no like memorization of things like times tables and stuff also doesn't work. There's a happy medium in the middle, but I do think Ontario got a little too far away from memorizing your times tables and memorizing like algorithms for division and things like that. Because if you are missing some of those key skills, and then it can be a hindrance at higher levels. So like, you might understand like, oh, division is me breaking things into groups. So like, 27 divided by 9 means I take 27 things and put them into 9 groups evenly. But then when you ask them, okay, what's 27 divided by 9? They're like, give me a minute. I got to draw 27 sticks and do 9 circles and count how much is in each circle. Like, which is a great method of explaining of what division means.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And how the operation, like what the operation performs for you. But if that's your method of solving it, you're not going to be able to get through like a math test. Like if you're doing like a grade 8 decimal division test and you're trying to use those strategies, it's you're not going to get through 2 questions before the time's up. So
and it's also like how much of the, as you get into high school, how much of the concepts are built on those. I mean, math just keeps building on itself as you get into deeper concepts. So I was going to ask you, like, would you say that you've run into a lot of issues between Mathnasium, who tries to do everything mentally, right? Like that's kind of the idea, or most things are done mentally, and a lot of students coming in without their basic math facts memorized, like learning those methods for figuring things out and stuff like that. Like, so how have you dealt with that?
It's not the easiest path on the first day, because you get a lot of kids who come in and they're like, well, my teacher lets me use a calculator at school, and I'm like, well, like no more, like fun time's over, like we're not using calculators here. You're not gonna get any better using a calculator. And then the other thing is like using a calculator, like things become mindless. Like you look at the question, you punch it in the calculator, you hit equals, it tells you the answer. Like you're not really thinking, you're not, and going through like even the most rudimentary questions a lot of times builds your like ability to use those things almost secondhand when you're doing higher level questions. Like for instance, like I get a lot of kids in grade 8 and grade 9 who are having challenges doing their like algebra. And when I go through them watching their algebra, they know the steps of how to solve the algebra correctly. It's that inside an algebra question, you're going to be doing multiplication, going to be doing division, going to be doing integers, and that's where they're stumbling. So like they mess up their integer combinations, they mess up their distribution, or like not even the distribution, but like the multiplication in the distribution. So it's like they understand the more complicated maneuver of distributing over a bracket, but they can't do like the 4 times 7 that's inside of it, or they're drawing out, they're like adding up 7 4 times, and you're like, oh, that's why you can't get through your test, because you can't do basic multiplication facts. So like, and sometimes it's a tough thing to convince like a grade 9 that like you need to go back and practice your grade 4 multiplication. That's what's holding you back now.
I know. And it's it's like when those things are automated, like even if you have a calculator right there, you're still needing to punch it in, and it's time, but it's also, I think, a little bit of brain energy too. I think that if it's just automated, then you don't even have to think about it. I think about this in my, so getting into university classes, like taking calculus or something like that. You don't even use a calculator because all the math is like
the numbers are set up to be so small that you don't even need it. Like it's 2 minus 1 or 3 times 2. It's such simple stuff.
It's all like so much more conceptual with it. But I also think if I wouldn't have that base of having those facts memorized, like that would slow me down so much if I'd have to type 7 times 4 into my calculator every time and to figure it out. Like,
and also think of probably how many times you've gotten a complex calculus question wrong because you performed a easy calculation incorrectly, right? Like it's like even at high levels of math, you're like, oh, -1 times -1 is not -1. Like, whoops, that's why I got my question wrong, right?
It messes up the whole thing.
Exactly. And you're like, I knew how to do everything else, but I messed up the most easy part. But it's like, it reminds me of learning, like when I was a kid, I played a lot of hockey, and my dad used to bring us to skating camps a lot in the summertime. And I remember there was this, we just thought he was the devil. He was the meanest guy, but he was actually a very nice guy. But he was just he was an older guy, and he had done a lot of he'd done skating camps for years. I think his name was Larry Black. And he had trained like skating camps, and a lot of the guys that went on from his camps went into like the OHL,
Oh,
even
wow.
on to the
Okay.
NHL and stuff like that. And
He knew what he was doing.
yeah, and he would do like 100 people, but you'd get in there and it was like, okay, do your backwards crossovers around the circle like 10 times, then go to the next one, do it 10 times again the other way. And you do that like 3 repetitions. And me being there as a 10-year-old, I'm like, Dad, what is this? Like, this is not how I want to spend my weekends. But like he's seeing the higher goals of like the payoff I'll get in the long run. But the reason I bring that up is like they would say in those camps, the reason we're doing backward skating so much is because you have to do it so much so that you can do it with your eyes closed and you aren't even thinking about it when you're doing it. Because when you're going to be backward skating in hockey, you're going to be skating backwards and having to like catch a pass, look at another player or like look at another skater down the ice and like start to make a pass towards them. You can't be thinking about doing your backwards crossovers at that moment. It has to be just second nature. Yeah. And that's the same thing that happens with like these algebra questions is like, if you're even spending time thinking about multiplication facts or how integers work inside those questions, you can't be doing that. It has to be such second nature that you can just focus on the algebra aspect.
Yeah, that's for sure. If you're down there, the question, what are some things that you think that Mathnasium does really well as far as helping students? Like what's one of the really key strengths of the Mathnasium curriculum or program?
The curriculum's very good, like we mentioned before, in terms of making things as digestible and straightforward as possible. Yeah. That's kind of the goal, I think, from the curriculum. Not too simple. Like it's as simple as possible. Like you can't oversimplify things to the point where they're not understanding the full breadth of the concept, but like they make it as easy and digestible and as not as intimidating as possible off the bat.
And I've been impressed with so the way the students work is they're giving binders and they work through a section that's on a specific topic. And I've been impressed with how it does ramp up. Like throughout a section, they like the first page is like super easy. Like they're always like, oh yeah, I got this.
Yeah, and by page 3, they're like, whoa, what's going on here?
Or even like it does it slowly though. Like what our pages like 10 to 15.
Yeah, usually packages around 10 to 15. Average one. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's always those like extra challenge questions at the very end.
Yeah.
And those are often like fairly deep level things that they're thinking about, and it kind of often they built up to it, and they can at least give it an honest attempt, which is kind of neat.
And that's I think what you got to do with it is like you got to ease them into it and start with the basics and start with the small numbers, and then you can slowly introduce the harder concepts as you build up. Yeah. And then the other part of Mathnasium that I really think they do a good job at is like our monthly membership model. Because once those parents pay for that monthly membership model, it really enforces them to come out and use it as much as they can. Yeah. And we kind of do that on purpose because we want to get them in there more often. Yep. Because then we can build that relationship with them, because a lot of times with kids, they're too intimidated to even admit what their problem is or admit where they're making their mistakes. And if you can build that relationship with them and they can feel comfortable just saying, I don't understand this, or this is really giving me a hard time, even just getting to a position where the kid's willing to say that to you is not easy. Like a lot of parents will be like, just ask your teacher at class. But then the kid's sitting there amongst 30 kids in their class and they're like, I don't want to put my hand up and look like the dumb one who doesn't understand.
Everyone else is getting it. Yeah.
Even though they probably aren't. Right. Yeah. So then when they come to Mathnasium, we can sit and maybe they don't ask that question on the first day or the second day, but then by the time they get to know them and, we've been chit-chatting about what they've been like, what sport they've been doing, or like, what their favorite TV show is, they kind of come to realize, oh, this is someone I can trust. This is someone who's not going to like mock me for something I don't understand. Yeah. And then once the student's able to kind of admit or realize where their problems are, it really gets into like the metacognition, which is like another big thing that Mathnasium really does well, is like we do a lot of like Socratic questioning, where like, and we do this a lot when we work, is you never tell the student the answer. Yeah. You never say like, okay, what's 7 times 3? Like, you just don't say 21. You say, okay, like, how would you solve 7 times 3? Or like, what's a method of getting to that answer? Right. Or like, what does 7 times 3 mean? Yeah. And you're asking those questions so that the student has to do the thinking and come to the conclusion themselves. So like, that ultimately is like when you can start to get the student comfortable enough where they'll start asking you for help, and then kind of them asking those questions will kind of cause a realization with themselves where they're like, oh yeah, I'm not very good at that, and I do need to improve at that. Whereas they can kind of just put it out of their mind and be like, I don't like division, I don't do it, and just avoid it.
Yeah.
Whereas when they kind of come to front with it and they kind of come to this atmosphere where they're like, oh, everyone else is getting it and they're having to work at it, but they're improving, then they kind of come to the other side where they're like, okay, I can put some work in and understand this.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. When I did when I started, you gave me some training videos or things to look over to kind of become introduced to how things are done.
Yeah, the Mathnasium method.
Yeah, exactly. And this is just a very small thing, but I wanted to ask you about it. Well, actually, just before that, I think it's kind of neat. The one thing I hadn't thought about before starting at Mathnasium, and I think I first got introduced to it with that video, is the concept of how the tutoring is done. So there's what you usually aim for, about a 5-to-1 ratio students to instructors, or
not quite that. Okay. Maybe about like 3 to 4 to 1. Yeah, like we can kind of push it sometimes. We're blessed with our staff in the area. Like with like the people we get from the University of Waterloo are like fantastic instructors that we have. So we can kind of stretch our ratio about to like 4 to 1 at the busiest times. Yeah.
But anyway, it's not 1-to-1. That's the key, and that kind of allows students to have some time to think and to work on their own. And that was kind of a neat concept, because I'd done just a little bit of tutoring, and you do just, when it's 1-to-1, you sit for a long time and let them do their math.
I remember working independently sometimes, like 1-to-1 tutoring, and you're like, okay, so this is how you do the question, and then you just kind of watch them go through 3 or 4, and you're like, I could be doing something else right now.
Exactly. Anyway, so the way it's set up is us instructors are on one side of the table, and the students all work on the other side of the table, and then I always like watching students when they come in for the first time, and so when you help them out, you always write you write upside down so that they can read, like that they faces them. So that it faces them. So so Larry Martin, is that his name?
Yeah, Larry Martinek. Yeah.
And so he was doing that on the training video. And I've tried it a few times, but I've never gotten to the point where I'm able to do it. So how did you learn to be able to do that?
The Mathnasium in London was they very much enforced it. Where they were
really? Okay.
They were like, it's going to be tough, but like you'll learn to do it eventually, and just keep doing it. At the beginning, I could really only do numbers. And like for the longest time, like 2s and 5s were always backwards, because those are hard to like orient correctly when you're backwards. But no, just lots and lots of practice.
Okay. Yeah.
And now I'm at the point where I can write like full sentences upside down to students and stuff. So
I just recently I heard a student say it to you. I think it was one of the first times they were there, and the student's like, you can write the right way for you if you want to. It's like, you're like, no, that's fine. I'm good with doing this.
Yeah.
That's just great.
But it's actually caused, like, I think I've developed dyslexia almost, where like I'll be writing like normal things the way I should be writing, and some of my letters will end up upside down.
Oh really? Okay, that
like,
does happen.
E will be upside down. I'm like.
Yeah, well, I've been very impressed with your ability to do that. I'm just too scared. Like I think it's so slow, and so I probably just need to get over the fear and just do it.
And the times I really did learn to develop it were the summer times when it was slow and I could take my time to do it. But I also do love it too, because it's one of those things where kids will sit down and they'll be like, "Whoa, what the heck? How are you doing that?" And you're just like, practice makes perfect. Just like it's your first lesson here. Analogy, just put more practice in. Anything's possible.
Yeah, very good. I think we'll move on to. I'm not sure to what I hear is section 4, and I'm not sure if some of this we might have been talking about somewhat. So I'm not sure how much new stuff we'll have here, but I'll ask you some of the questions and we'll see what we come up with. And we were talking about how important the base is in math and developing that base. So what are some of, from your experience and the years you've been tutoring here, what are some of those just absolutely important math skills that need to be there before we can keep building on that foundation?
Yeah, and I read this question, and it's a question that's difficult to have one answer for all age levels, and I kind of thought of it more as like a couple different, like, so like for our youngest students, like kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, the biggest thing that I see from kids having issues at that level is not understanding their place value well enough. Knowing the difference between ones and tens and what they mean, and that 10 ones makes a 10 and 10 tens makes 100, and understanding that system, and even that like ones go to the right and tens go to the left, or depending on your orientation. If they don't have that, once you go into borrowing or carrying with two-digit addition, it's all just a jumble to them. They don't understand why when I add up 10 here, does that add only 1 over there? Like, and I think it's the reason that happens is because it's such a like simple thing almost, and so foundational that teachers don't even think to teach it. Like it's so easy that they almost assume the kids know it. But like we spend a lot of time at Mathnasium really focusing on place value. So I would say that like for a lot of like younger students, that's the one area where like if they're having issues in addition with carrying or subtraction with borrowing, I always make them go through place value first, so that they understand what tens and ones are and where they belong.
And you find that often helps to get them into the borrowing and carrying then?
For sure. And even not if it directly helps them with it, it helps them know the terminology. So when you say things like, okay, we borrow one from the tens column and bring it to the ones column, if they don't know what tens and ones are, you're just speaking a different language to them. But you think, oh, everyone knows what tens and ones are, right? But it's such an easy thing that we kind of gloss over it. And then the kids are just kind of left in the dust being like, I don't understand what you're talking about.
You had talked right at the beginning about how maybe some people are born a little more with some of those skills or understanding. And I don't actually remember learning place value. I mean, I totally got it by the time I was in school. Like, I think I remember learning it, but that was super easy. So I wonder if that's the case for a lot of teachers. They don't actually remember learning it themselves.
I think a lot of people just pick it up naturally. Like maybe 25 out of the 30 kids in the class pick it up easily, but then some kids maybe didn't catch on to that tens and ones concept that well. And then when they move on to later things and they're talking about those, they're lost. And another,
they never had that.
Another student I can think of just that kind of popped into my mind. He unfortunately suffers from a little bit of like mild dyslexia, so it really made the concept a lot harder for him. And and like other students with like more difficulties in like language aspects. Classes will go quickly through that and they'll be like, this is a 10, that's a 1, and assume that people have kind of picked up on it. But their retention for language is not as strong. So we need to spend more time reinforcing those concepts so that they can use them in everyday math.
And that's great when there's like a tutoring service like you offer that can help fill in, and it just take time, like take a few hours to learn place value that a classroom isn't going to take the time to do, because like you said, 25 of the kids probably don't need it and are good to go. So,
and that's kind of the unfortunate aspect of how the classroom sizes are up to 30 now is the people in the middle of the classroom tend to get a decent shake of things. It's the 5% the 5 students at the top of the class and the 5 at the bottom that kind of get the ones at the top feel bored, aren't getting the challenge they want, and the ones at the bottom are feeling like rushed and left behind a little bit. And they do a good job of trying to build IEPs and tackling these issues, but I think that ultimately it comes down to like a resource issue where they don't have enough time, enough bodies to keep on to give all those students the teaching they need.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And then to continue off that, like the basic foundational skills, like memorize your timetables. Like a lot of people want to say you don't need to memorize your timetables, and if you have strategies to count them up, then you can do it. And like those strategies are really good to learn them. Like, your nines times tables is take 10 of them and subtract 1. So like, to do like 7 times 9, you do 10 times 7 and then subtract a 7 to get to 63, which works really well. But if you're on a grade 10 like quadratics test and you're doing 7 times 9 and thinking of that strategy, like you just lost a minute that you need on that test. Like memorize your times tables in grade 5 or 6, or hopefully in grade 4 even. But like by the time you're approaching algebra in grade 7 and 8, you should have those times tables knocked out. And then going into more like the high, I don't want to go into like the grade 10 and 11 of what skills you need there because that gets really in depth.
Yeah.
Like there's a million things you need to know at that point. But the one that I see that a lot of grade 9s, I see a lot of grade 9s walk in and the only thing they have trouble with is algebra. Learn your algebra inside and out.
Yeah.
Learn a lot of like just your like AX plus B equals C. Learn to like move things across an equal sign and learn to divide out that coefficient and get your answer because it is such a foundational thing. You'll see it. And if you learn to do that well, it's going to help you not only in math, but also in chemistry and physics as well.
There's a lot that uses it, obviously.
Yeah.
I've had a number of students that have had trouble with like, to get rid of a positive integer that you subtracted on the other side. Like that seems to be tricky sometimes. To be able to think through.
Super terminology way of saying it is like the inverse operation property, which I never say in the classroom, but basically like if you just say it as you do the opposite to get what's rid of there, so or get rid of what's already there. So like if you have 7x plus 2 and you want to get rid of the plus 2, well, like what's the opposite of addition? What would get rid of addition? And kids usually click in, subtraction's the opposite of addition. Same thing works once you teach them that like 7n means 7 times n. You're like, what's the opposite of multiplication? Division. You got to divide it out. Yeah. And then the other thing that really reinforces is before grade 6 and younger, the equal sign is pretty much just taught as your answer goes here. Like there's an equal sign, there's two numbers, and then the equal sign means this is the answer.
Yeah, it's really, almost like do something. Like you see an equal sign, you got to put something behind it.
This is where you do the work. You get your answer out. But it actually means like you need to teach it with algebra that it's a concept of a scale. The equal sign is the middle point of the scale, and both sides are balanced and equal to each other. And you can move things from one side or the other to the scale as long as you do the same thing to each side. Then the scale will be balanced. So understanding the concept of an equal sign is another one of those things that teachers think it's rudimentary. Teachers think, it's an equal sign. Everyone knows how it works. But a lot of kids just don't understand what it actually means. Exactly. It doesn't mean do something. It means that these two sides are the same. They're equal.
You've been talking about some of them here, but are there like any little techniques or things that you come across or use regularly that have just been really helpful for getting across difficult or abstract concepts?
Once again, like using place value is one that I really rely on. And this is another thing that we teach at Mathnasium that doesn't get taught as much in the school curriculum is like halves and wholes. And you've probably noticed this a lot as I almost always, any student that I start with, it's like grade 9 or younger, I start them with halves and wholes, and it's even not something that's like required for their course, but it's just something to get them more comfortable with working with numbers and playing with numbers. Because one of the ways that we teach doing halves and wholes is splitting them up in place value. So like say you're finding like half of 84, or we'll say 83, and then it might be a little harder. You don't want to, finding half of 83 in your head is really tough to do. But if you just split it up into 80 and 3, half of 80 is not too hard because half of 8 is 4, so half of 80 is 40. Half of 3, I'll just draw 3 circles on the page for the kid and cut them in half, and you can easily see, okay, there's 1.5 on one side, right? So half of 83 is half of 80 being 40, half of 3 being 1.5, and then 40 plus 1.5 is 41.5. And then this concept, once they've learned how to kind of take numbers apart and put them back together after performing operations on them, can be really applied to multiplication. So then you go into doing like, 93 times 6. Well, 3 times 6 is 18. 90 times 6 is 540. So 540 plus 18 would give you 558. So it's like little tricks like that. You learn them easy, and then you can apply them in other areas. And then the other thing too is it just gives them more. Like a lot of kids get a lot of trepidation with numbers where they're like, I can only do things when I'm told that I can do them this way. Like I need to have permission that I'm allowed to do this, right? Where if you learn that, you're like, no, it's a playground. Just mess around with it. Like rip it apart, put it back together, play around with it, right? Like there's rules we have to follow, but there's also like a lot of pathways to get to the right answer. So I think that's like one cool concept that we do. And I was kind of wondering why that's always at the beginning of often when a student comes for the first time. So it's great to have that answer now.
We talked about some of the concepts that students struggle, or I think that went along quite a bit with the foundational thing, or maybe not. Are there certain things that you just find that are regularly a problem for any student?
Yeah, there were a couple. This was one of the questions that I was looking at last night of like, what is my answer going to be for this? And there's a couple of them, like the classic dividing by zero. Why can't you divide by zero?
Yep.
And having a good answer for that. Like my best explanation is like, normally the way division works, like 10 divided by 2. You have 10 things, you put them in 2 bags evenly. There's 5 in each bag. 10 divided by 1, well, we have 10 things, but we only have 1 bag. So all 10 things have to go in the 1 bag. So 10 divided by 1 is 10. But then 10 divided by 0 is like, okay, we have 10 things, but we don't have a bag.
Yeah.
So how's this going to work, right? Like, so that's sometimes how I explain it to kids is like division is when we're taking a number and breaking into groups. But if we don't have any groups to put the number in, or we don't have anything to put it, then this isn't going to work. So
and I think it messes with students because you can go 0 divided by 10.
Yeah, exactly.
So
but then you can explain that one because you're like, okay, we have 0 things, but we have 10 bags. How much goes in each bag? Well, we don't have anything, so there's nothing to put anywhere, right?
I used to have fun with my students to like get them to guess the answer. So if you go 10 divided by 0, obviously they guess 0 right away. So then you can show that if you like anytime, like because multiplication and division are inverse of each other, you can always go back. Like 10 divided by 5 is 2, so 2 times 5 is 10.
Yeah.
But you could try to go 10 divided by 0 is 0. 0 times 0 is not 10, so that doesn't work. So then they're always like 10. And then you go 10 divided by 0 is 10. Well, 10 times 0 is not 10. So
that's a smart way. I've never thought of that, but that definitely works. If you go backwards, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, exactly. But it is weird. Like it's one of those few things. I mean, you get into more in math as you go on, but it hits you early that's something you just can't do. It's undefined. What does that mean?
The other one that's a real killer, and I feel like I run into this once a week, is why does subtracting a negative add?
Oh, yes.
Like,
how do you explain that one?
The best way to I've explained it is like, okay, so like if you add a positive, it goes up. If you add a negative, it goes down.
Yeah.
If you take away a positive, it goes down.
Yeah. So
if you take away a negative, it can't also go down.
Right.
Because subtracting positives already goes down.
Yeah.
So it's got to go the other way.
Yeah.
And like that's like kind of the more mathematical explanation. And oftentimes in Mathnasium, you probably hear me all the time, is I always try to find like real world examples.
Yeah, you like the kids. Thermometer for that one, right?
Yeah, so it's like if you're taking away cold temperature, so it's getting warmer. Or another one is like, say you owe a person $20. That's like negative 20 in your bank account, but you get rid of that debt. Well, now you have more money effectively, right? So like subtracting a debt means I'm in a better position or I'm more positive than I was before.
Do you ever get students asking you why multiplying and dividing integers works the way it does?
No, not as much. And that's another one that I've never really gotten into in terms of like explaining.
Yeah, that one's pretty clear to like. I think it's easy to follow. Like,
and I think the reason we don't get many questions in it is because you can tell kids such a steadfast rule of like 2 things the same, multiply to positive, 2 things opposite, go to negative. Don't worry about why it works. Just do it that way. You'll always get the right answer. I know, if you just follow that rule.
It's actually like way simpler than adding and subtracting integers.
And we'll get kids sometimes in like grade 7 or 8 that are going through their integer packages, and they'll go through the integer addition and subtraction unit, and then they see the multiplication division on the horizon, and they're like, oh boy, here we go. And I'm like, no, don't worry, this is a cakewalk. You already got through the hard part. Like addition and subtraction is way harder to do. So because there's essentially 4 different rules you have to remember for integer subtraction or addition and subtraction, kids find it much harder. And then the other thing with integer addition and subtraction that really is a killer for kids is they always think that the front number is going to impact the operation somehow. But like the front number really doesn't change what you're doing. It's just kind of like your starting point. But they'll think, oh, like a positive subtract a negative has to work differently than a negative subtracting a negative. But it's like, no, all the actions happening on the back end, the front number is just where you start from.
Yeah, exactly. It just gets confusing with that negative sign.
And they start to see negative signs and they're like, whoa, something's got to be different, but it's not really.
Is there, so this is like totally unrelated to any like, as far as what students struggle with, but is there anything like that you just don't like to have to explain or teach, or that you struggle to get across?
I feel like I've kind of mastered everything at the elementary school
Right, yeah,
level a
that's
little
true,
bit.
yeah.
Enough of those things you can kind of come up with enough tips and tricks where they're not super long. The areas like mostly come into like some of the more complicated high school areas.
Yeah.
Like I still like there'll be once in a while where a trig identity question will send me for a loop and
Yeah.
I'll be like staring at it for 20 minutes. We had a couple calculus students last semester where like I was bringing questions home and working on them
Okay,
like
yeah.
after work because I was like I don't understand like the rate at which this cone is increasing like
Yeah.
at this moment like, and it's also because I haven't done the calculus
Yeah.
or I don't do it as often day to day. Yeah, those two like trig identities, even in high school I hated them, so it's no
Okay,
surprise that I
yeah.
still don't like them. The problem I have with trig identities is they're so open ended. Like math, typically I find like if you have seen an algorithm or if you have a good set of skills, there's almost any question with an equal sign you like know the direction you need to bring it in.
Yeah.
If you've been there before. But trig identities can suddenly just spiral off into weird regions of math you didn't even think. Like you'll be suddenly factoring inside a question,
Yeah,
or you'll
yeah.
be like doing complex fraction division or something like that, and you're just like, and you didn't expect to see it in the question, but it actually is part of the solution.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, anything else that you wanted to say on that before we I ask you about some advice that you have here to kind of finish things off?
No, not particularly. I should have thought of that more of my like kind of weaknesses in terms of teaching things or things I don't prefer to teach. I mean,
No, that's fine. I
mean,
thought
I
it's
guess
fun to ask sometimes what.
I don't enjoy teaching division. I've like
Okay.
learned that we need to do it, and it like kids need to learn how to do it.
Yeah.
But the reason I don't really like learning or like going through long decimal division is it's a really tedious and time like takes up a lot of time. It's very painstaking. Like you cannot miss a little tiny detail or they're going to get it wrong.
Yeah.
And then kids get frustrated when you're like your decimal points off one and they're like, oh, I did everything else wrong or right, but just the decimal points in the wrong spot. And then you put all this time learning to do decimal division, and then kids get to grade 9 and they get a calculator handed to them.
I know,
and
yeah.
they never do decimal division again. So you're kind of like, why are we learning this just for the test? But I do think like even if you end up never learning or using decimal division at higher grades, it still teaches you how to follow complex algorithms correctly. Because like if you go to high level math, you're going to be doing polynomial division, which is probably just as complex as decimal division.
Yeah.
And those skills will transfer. So it's not a waste of time, but sometimes I'll like be teaching a student in grade 7 decimal division, and then 2 years later in grade 9 they're like, no, I have a calculator, I don't have to do it. I'm like, oh, great.
Yeah, well, I like the way of thinking about it, that there is value in the skill of it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, sometimes it's tough to see it directly, but it does pay off in the long run.
Yeah. So a couple questions on what advice you might have, and you may certainly answer them from the perspective of the owner of a Mathnasium, or however you want to answer them. But what advice do you have for math students or the parents of math students, just in general?
I would say like don't be afraid to spend more time on the basics. Oftentimes I'll see like a kid in grade 7 who's struggling with their grade 7 work, and their parent will say, well, I went to Indigo and I got them like this grade 7 curriculum workbook to practice. And it's like, that's just going to overwhelm them. Don't put them at the grade 7. Get them a grade 5 one.
Yeah.
And they might not think it's super valuable, but you need to have a good hold on those basic skills because you're going to be using them later. And almost always I see that when kids are having issues, it's not the material from that year. It's things they've missed from previous years or things they're not an expert in. Because you go through a lot of units in a math year. You might go through like 20 different little tiny units. And even kids who end up with like an 80 might have 2 units that they failed. Right? So let's say they got like, 90s on all the other units and they failed 2 units. Well, if that one unit was like how exponents work, when they go to use exponents in grade 8, they might be stranded on that on that concept and be stuck there for a while. And it can really be like a pin in their, like it's like a real like stone in their shoe. Yeah. Where it's just like every time you're trying to do anything, any question they run into an exponent, they're immediately like, oh God, I don't want to see that exponent, right? Whereas if you just go back to the year before and go through that exponent unit again, then that problem gets totally alleviated. So I would say like don't feel like you're wasting time by working on the basics. Like really stress it. I know it's tough to get kids to work on things that they find easy.
Yeah.
But, and like you mentioned, like a great basketball shooter doesn't take 5 shots a day.
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of kids will get homework sent home to them and they'll say, okay, do 1A, 1D, and 1F.
Right.
And that's
yeah.
all you need to do.
Just a little smattering. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of the teachers bring that down because they often get complaints from, I think, the school board or from like parent council committees that say students are getting too much homework sent home, which is a concern. But I would say, like, encourage your kid to just do all of them. If they can do 1A and 1D and they got through those, go through BC and do them all. Like it's only going to, once you've learned to do a concept, doing more of them usually doesn't take that much more time.
Right. Yeah.
And just do 10 of them. Don't do 2 of them, do 10 of them. It helps get it more into your long-term memory.
Yep.
And the other thing too is, like, math at school can get very compartmentalized.
Oh,
They'll do division for a month.
Yeah.
They'll go into a different unit and they won't do division until next year again.
Yeah.
And by that time, the kids kind of they've forgotten a lot of their division skills.
Right.
Don't be afraid, even for those students who are doing pretty well in math, over the summer, just like get them to do a couple varied math things. Just like keep it more varied. We do this a lot of Mathnasium where, like, kids have at minimum 6 topics available to them at all times.
Yeah.
And we encourage them to bounce around between the different topics because if you can do a little bit of a lot of different areas every day, then that's going to push those skills into your long-term memory.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just do like 100 division questions in one day, by the end of that day, you might be really good at doing them. You might know how to do them in a week, but in a month or a year, you might have had those skills kind of disappear.
If you don't keep getting them.
Yeah. So keep fresh on your basics. Yeah.
Yeah. That's excellent. Great advice. This is on a completely different topic from, but still think about your experience here. Do you have any advice for entrepreneurs or small business owners, kind of from your experience of starting up your Mathnasium franchise?
Yeah, I was definitely really blessed to have, like, the support of my parents and then also have the Mathnasium, like, team behind me when I was first getting into things. And, like, I even have, like, a lawyer in the family who I kind of leaned on a little bit when I was getting incorporated and had her, like, look through my lease and things like that. And like, I still paid for all of her services, but it's still very nice to have someone you can trust.
Yeah.
So, like, have some people in your corner that you can rely on that have skills you don't have. And then also, like, just take things a day at a time. Like, you have to wear so many hats when you're a small business owner.
Yeah.
Like, even like doing payroll, doing schedules, doing like hiring, like, you know, like all like advertising, like all the little tiny things that go into it. Like, a lot of people feel like if you make a mistake, it's all just going to burn down in a day.
Yeah.
Like, you can make tiny mistakes and improve from them and make, and like, if you do an interview and you're trying to hire someone and it goes poorly, well, that's just experience you have now for the next interview. Or, like, if you mess up, like, well, don't mess up payroll. Payroll is one you should get down pat. But, like, if you mess up a schedule and, you know, you're short shifted one day, well, you got to plow through that day, and maybe it's not going to be an A day for the business. Or you might get a C grade for that day, kind of. But, like, you learn your lesson, like, okay, I need to be on top of the schedule more for next time. So it's like, it's a process. Like, a lot of people I feel like that want to get into businesses have the expectation of, like, I need to be perfect on day one.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I need to, like, have all of my ducks in a row. And, like, there's going to be a lot of things that you've never done before and challenges you're going to run into that you've never seen before. You didn't even expect that were going to be challenges. Like, someone's just going to walk in your building and start talking to you about something. You're like, I don't even know how to, like, deal with what this, or like comprehend what this guy's telling me about, like, be it like someone who's trying to solicit something to your business, or like, like someone trying to get you like a new credit card processing thing, and you're like, do I want one? Or like, and then you have to kind of go through this query of like figuring that question out, and you would have never thought of like having to answer that question before. But you just take it in stride, like take it a day at a time. And then I would also say, like, you can't take every day at a time. Like, make sure you have a business plan and know where your break-even points are. Know what your, like, fixed costs are, and know what your costs that are going to scale up as you grow. Try to identify where your, like, bottlenecks are in your business. Like, where, like, for instance, like a long time ago, one of the issues I was running into is just answering the phone. Like I didn't want to overstaff so that I could just sit at the front and answer the phone all the time because I
Yep.
wanted to teach and be involved with the kids. But we would get a lot of calls between 3 to 8 during the day when I'd have to be teaching. And I didn't want to leave the floor, but at the same time, I couldn't afford to miss these calls and miss out on leads and prospective clients. And it used to just eat up so much of my day, and I'd be running around so much. So then eventually I just signed up for a call answering service. So now they answer all my calls and they take messages for me and they do reminder calls and they like set up assessments for me. So it's like just try to identify what is causing the most issues in my day and what can I do to improve that so I can kind of open things up even further.
Yeah, well, that's great advice, and yeah, it's great. Just for our last couple minutes here yet, I always like to just make sure that there's not something that you wanted to say that you didn't have a chance to yet, or something that you want to promote here for our last couple minutes.
Yeah, no, nothing really I'd want to promote other than the center itself. You know, you can find us on any kind of social media platform or just Googling Mathnasium of Waterloo, you'll find us. And if you're curious about us, just give us a call or shoot us an email or reach out in some way, even over like Facebook or something like that. And we'd love to chat and see what your situation is. Like we love to have new students to work with. And it's a real passion, and I feel like a lot of people that come into the business see that I'm kind of behind it every day and see the passion of it. And we really try our best to give a really good service to the clients that we work with. So
yeah. So it's just math tutoring is all you do?
All we do is math tutoring, and pretty much we're strictly doing from grades 2 to 12. We do get inquiries about adult learners, but we tend to stay away from those just because we're very tied to the Ontario curriculum, and that's where we're experts. Yeah. And when we get into working in different like certification courses or college courses, I shy away from those because I want to make sure that I'm able to give good service to them. Yeah. Yep.
So pretty much anyone from grade 2 to grade 12 would be welcome to come in and check it out.
And whether you're looking for, like, whether you're a D student wanting to be an A student or you're already an A student and you want to go from a 95 to a 98, we can help you out. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's excellent. And thank you for sharing some of your experience and some of the things that you've learned from it. And
it was really fun. It's good. Funny you're in the day-to-day so much, and it's nice to have times like these to kind of reflect back on how long it's been and where you are now and where you started from.
Yeah, well, it's great, and I really appreciate you coming and sharing with us. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and thank you, Joe, for sharing your knowledge with us. It was great to hear the story of how Joe's Mathnasium franchise got started and the things that led up to that and the effort that needed to go into it to make that happen. I also really enjoyed discussing different strategies and things that are needed in order to help students with their math and some of the fundamental principles that math skills are built on, and just some of those foundations that students need to have in order to be able to succeed in math, especially as they get into deeper concepts. The thing that really stood out to me, though, was when Joe was talking about how math and learning math and getting better at math and gaining confidence in math skills can also help students in other areas of their life. And the confidence that comes from that, and also the skills, I think, in logic and reasoning, and probably other things too, can really help a student develop in other parts of their life as well. And I hadn't thought about that before, and I was really glad that Joe brought that out, and was really a neat thing to think about. So thank you, Joe, for coming on the podcast and sharing those things with us. This is the last normal episode here for 2020. Next week, I'm planning to have a shorter episode, and the reason for that is that it's coming out since I come out with a new episode every Friday. The next one is scheduled to come out on Christmas Day, and the one following that is actually going to be on New Year's Day, of course. And so for both of those, I'm planning to not have a guest. I'm going to do a solo episode, a shorter episode. Next week, I'm planning to do a little more of a recap on the past year and do a little bit of reflection and thinking about some of the things that I've learned, and maybe recapping some of the episodes that I did, and that kind of thing. Maybe a little bit of reflection on the year as well. And then the following week on New Year's Day, I'm planning to do more of a kind of looking ahead to the year in the future, both for the podcast and maybe also a little bit of personal things with that too. So yeah, just a little bit of a different episodes for the next 2 weeks. But then following that, in 2021, I'm planning to kind of continue on a similar schedule and trajectory to what I was doing here for the last half of 2020. As always, I'd love to hear feedback if you have anything to share, especially as we kind of enter this transitional time of moving into a new year over the next few weeks. So if you have anything to share with me or suggestions of guests to welcome to the show in 2021, please feel free to pass those on to me. Good way to contact me is through the website, everydayexpertise.ca, and also an email that goes along with that, contact@everydayexpertise.ca. So either of those ways are a great way to connect with me, or look us up on social media as well. On most of the normal social media platforms, Everyday Expertise Podcast. You can find us that way. That's all for now. I hope you'll join me again next week on the Everyday Expertise Podcast.